Hi, my name is Pia Tuominen, and today I'm recording a new podcast episode, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to my guest, Professor John Reid from the University of East London, and you're also the chairperson of the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, if I'm not mistaken. Anything else you'd like to add as your expertise?
No, that's enough to be going on with. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. This is a very interesting conversation ahead of us, or at least that's what I think. I have many questions I'd like to ask you, but before we start, I'd like to start by asking, how did you end up researching these important issues? Because the reason I sent you the email invitation to have this discussion is that I think you've done very important work on bringing forward the patient voices, especially as related to ECT, and like work on psychosis and how adverse life events relate to those experiences, about drug withdrawal and everything. But how did you get started? How did you end up researching and working on these issues?
Well, I think if we're honest, most people in mental health, either as research or mental health professionals, get involved because of their own mental health issues one way or the other. So I was an average teenager in post-war Britain with the average dysfunctional family. So on a good day, I was trying to figure out why the rest of the world was crazy, and on a bad day, I was trying to figure out why I was crazy. So I went to university to study psychology to think that that might help me figure all that out, which it didn't, unfortunately. But that's just my general introduction of sort of why I got interested in mental health and in general, trying to understand why so many of us are messed up and scared and disturbed and confused and so forth. And then I got started working, and my very first job was as a nursing aide in New York in a psychiatric hospital. And there I was struck by how almost every time I could establish a relationship with somebody, they would tell me awful things that had happened to them that they believed were the causes of their problems. And I was also struck by how uninterested any of the psychiatrists were in those stories. And it didn't really make any sense to me because I sort of followed the general idea that most members of the public have, that craziness is caused by crazy making things happening, and depression is caused by depressing things happening. And I couldn't understand. These were good people. They were just desperately wanting to help, but they thought they could help by counting behaviors and looking up in a book what word to use, what diagnosis to use, and then that told them what color pill to pick, and they completely missed what was going on for the person. So that's it in a nutshell. That's how I sort of got into. So when later on I went back into academia, those were the sorts of things that I wanted to study. The relationship between adverse events and circumstances and psychosis was my main area, but also in terms of ECT. My first encounter with ECT was in that same hospital in New York, where 3 times a week there'd be this row of older women, and that's who they almost always were, lined up and going into a room and coming out unconscious on a trolley, which I didn't understand. So I asked for permission to go in and watch. And to cut a long story short, I ended up in the car park being sick. I was so distressed by watching what was happening there. So that's a long answer to your question, Pia.
Yeah, that's you know what that got me thinking is the absurdness that is so easily visible for some of us in the mental health field and not so easily visible for some others. That's something I've been wondering in the recent years because I'm a former patient myself, and I think it was as a result of quite a few lucky coincidences that I ended up getting out of the system and started to question the treatment that I was given because I was on multiple drugs medications. I think these words can be very misleading. Like if we were talking about treatment and medications, we think about something that is helpful and something that is valuable, and it's not always so, and actually quite often not so. But when I was thinking back to my own experiences, I think it's very well illustrated in this this book I read, a straight talking introduction to the causes of mental health problems, which I read and highly recommend our listeners to read as well, because you talk about like one of the causes, the adverse events in life and so on. And nobody actually saw what was happening to me, because nobody was interested in that. Like being bullied at school, having low self-esteem, ending up together with a man who wasn't very good company to me, but behaving very immaturely, getting angry easily. I was very anxious at home for good reasons when I was living with him. And I ended up with depression. Like, a funny thing, depression, it just hit me out of nowhere. And then I started the treatments, and I was told that I have this chemical imbalance. Such a common story. I think it's still a common story, even though my experiences from the beginning of the 2000. And then it got worse. It got worse. I think it changed. My diagnosis changed to, okay, this is psychotic depression, not just depression. And then it ended up in the schizoaffective disorder. And the last time that or actually the first time I started to question what was going on was when I was talking with a psychiatrist. I was meeting at the time about my medications. And I mentioned to him that I don't like who I am without these medications. And he asked me, like, what do you mean by that? Tell me more. And I said that if I forget to take one of those medications, I get very anxious, and I can't sleep, and I felt very like restless and everything. And I thought that was me underneath the medications. And he said to me, like, he basically just brushed it off in a like quick sentence. Oh, those are just withdrawal symptoms. Like when you forget one of these drugs, your body is accustomed to these drugs, and when you forget one of those, or you have to be without one of those for a while, that's what you get, withdrawal symptoms. That was one of those coincidences that really got me thinking. If it's not me, what is coming forward? Who am I? I've been on these medications for multiple years. Who am I underneath everything this? So that was one of the important moments for me, but not for him. Like he just brushed it off, like, oh, those are just withdrawal symptoms. And then, like at that point, I was on a disability pension because my situation was hopeless, basically. And the last notes from that psychiatrist before I went back to him to request a withdrawal plan from the medications was that he had tried to give me psychoeducation about my illness, right. And that all these remaining negative symptoms and cognitive difficulties I had basically were a part of my illness, and there's not a better response to be able to get, or like with any medication. So he didn't recommend any changes to my medication. But what happened after I withdrew from the medication, all those negative symptoms and cognitive challenges disappeared. So I think we have quite a problematic treatments with these current mental health paradigm. And that's what I'd like to ask you, like, what do you see? What are the main issues with the current mental health paradigm and this medical model?
Well, the problems start with the model itself before we talk about the consequences of the model, which are the medicines and the ECT and the diagnosis. But the model itself it's inaccurate and it's quite debilitating. So the model says when we're distressed or confused or desperate or suicidal or whatever, that's because there's something wrong with us, and there's something biological wrong with us, specifically in the brain. So we have a disease of the brain or a disorder of the brain causing us to have these feelings or these thoughts or delusions or whatever it is. And there's two problems with that. And the first one is that it's not true. There's nothing in the diagnostic manual, which is now 650 pages long. There's not a single biological marker for any of those disorders in the entire diagnostic manual. And they acknowledge that. But they keep using this model, even though they know they have no evidence for it, which is very strange. I mean, a very concrete example, you mentioned chemical imbalance, which is, we have a supposed problem with serotonin for depression, a supposed problem with dopamine for psychosis. There's just no evidence for that. The chemical imbalance for depression, that myth has been dispelled very powerfully in the last 2 or 3 years. There's never been any evidence for it, but the drug companies announced it and psychiatry just repeated it without any critical analysis at all. It was very irresponsible. So that's the first problem, that it's not accurate. It's basically a lie. And secondly, it's very damaging, because if you tell people who are, especially people who are, when we are distressed and feeling lost and down, and if you tell people, well, this is because there's something wrong with you, something wrong with your brain, or brackets, or your genes, that's a whole nother story. There's no basis for that either. If you tell people there's something irreversibly wrong with their brains, then you wonder why they don't get better. Because you're quite in a powerful position when you're a psychiatrist telling, you're supposed to know these things. So you tell a patient, this is because there's something wrong with your brain. And you say, oh, thank you for explaining that, doctor. So I believe you. But it's debilitating. I mean, it's depressing to think that there is all these difficulties in my life because there's something wrong with my brain. I mean, some people find a bit of relief in that, in as much as it's not my fault then. I'm not a bad person, but I am a dysfunctional person, and there's not much we can do about it other than take the medication which might control the symptoms. So anyway, in a long-winded way, the model is wrong and it's damaging. There's a lot of research showing that the more people accept a medical model, the more stigmatized their attitudes are towards other people and to themselves. The more patients swallow the medical model, the more depressed they get as a result of that, and the less they like themselves. So those are the two problems with the model itself. And then we go on, of course, to all the consequences of the model, which is primarily the diagnoses, the medication, and ECT. So we can work our way through those if you would like to.
Yeah, definitely. Those are important as well. So what do you think are the main issues with the treatments?
Well, let's just touch on diagnosis first, which are the pathway to the medication, because we have a model, very simplistic model, is that after you've counted the behaviors and found out what page of the DSM you're on, then that determines what color pill you get. But the diagnoses themselves are part of the somewhat debilitating process where you tell people there's something wrong with them. So let's take depression. Depression, we all know, and all surveys show that the public knows that depression is caused by depressing things happening. You don't need research to show that, but there's hundreds of studies showing that adverse life events, depressing events, loss, and so forth, is what causes depression 95% of the time. There are some biological conditions that thyroid, or et cetera, that can cause depression, but the vast majority of depression is directly traceable to depressing things happening, and that's what people need help with, the things that are happening in their lives that is depressing them. But we're told instead that no, depression is not caused by depressing things. It's caused by this thing inside you called depressive disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of sounds convincing, especially if it's said by a doctor with lots of authority, but actually it means it's basically saying depression is caused by depression. It's a circular loop that means absolutely nothing other than the fact that the thing inside you, which is causing the depression, this depression inside you, which is a biological flaw that you happen to have. So the diagnoses are also, they're not very scientific. We could talk for ages about the reliability and validity of them all. They're very, very low on those criteria for real scientific constructs, but they're also damaging because they they create the illusion of an explanation, which can temporarily be comforting. When you're distressed, you want to know what's going on with you. You go to the doctor, you tell them what's happening, and the last thing you want to hear is, "Oh, I don't know what that is." You want to hear, "Oh, I know what that is. That's disorder." So it can be helpful in the short term because it makes you feel that the doctor knows what's going on. It makes you feel that other people have got the same thing because it's, you can look it up in a book and there it is. And it suggests that the doctor might know what to do. But in the long-term diagnoses are not helpful because they get in the way of figuring out what's going on in someone's life and what help they actually need with those life events and circumstances. So I'm talking a lot. So the next is medication. But do you want me to just carry on, or should talk about medications, or do you want to ask something else?
There's something I'd like to add to this conversation. It's very convincing to be told that you have some kind of an illness.
Yes.
It's very convincing because I was studying psychology at the university when I got into this terrible loop of going to hospital, getting back home, going to hospital, getting back home. I had been studying psychology for about a couple of years before this kind of a roller coaster really hit me, and I had to quit those studies. You could think that I would have had some idea of thinking about these things more critically or something like that, but no, nothing at all. I remember reading from the textbook about clinical psychology about this serotonin imbalance theory and everything, and that's something I very clearly remember where I was when I was reading that. Okay, this is what is going on with depression, and I had already studied medication by then, but it's a very convincing story.
Yes.
And it can feel relieving at first, sure, but in the longer game, it becomes very, very distracting or disastrous.
Indeed. I'm very worried about I was going to say thousands, but it's probably millions of young people now who are busy self-diagnosing themselves with ADHD and autism and all this whole neurodiversity thing, which doesn't really exist. There's no such construct as neurodiversity. It's just a word that, again, is pushing these medical explanations, biological explanations of our differences. But so many young people are thinking, now I know what's wrong with me. Thank God. Now I didn't know what was wrong. So I'm neurodiverse. Maybe I've got ADHD. I'll go on the internet and press a few, but yes, I've got ADHD. Thank God. Now I know what it is. And that, short-term relief, because the illusion of an explanation for things that are sometimes hard to understand. But at universities where I am, we have up to 30-40% of students now getting extra hours or help or whatever because they are neurodiverse or they're ADHD. And I think some people genuinely do struggle and genuinely need help, of course. But I worry that we're teaching these young people, you've got this thing, there's not much you can do about it, we can just give you some extra hours, rather than saying, well, so what are you struggling with?
Yeah.
And what you need help with? I can't possibly give a talking class, I've got whatever it is. So it's, okay, well, we won't ask you to do that then. Rather than saying, okay, how can we help you be less anxious about that so you don't go through the rest of your life thinking that you can't give a talking class? So the diagnosis is becoming a huge phenomenon, and it's a bit tricky to speak against it as I am now, because you can be portrayed as being insensitive to these people's needs, and I don't mean to be that at all. I'm just saying that calling it ADHD or neurodiverse or autism, it doesn't explain anything, and it doesn't help you figure out what it is you need to do differently to make your life better. It just gives you almost sort of an excuse, that sounds a bit harsh, for not doing anything. So but as you and I agree, in the short term it can feel very relieving. I've got an explanation now I know what's going on.
One of the things that worries me is that people don't always see the long-term effects as having gone to this one particular path or this road that ends them up in a very different place than they could have been. Like, for example, if for me someone would have asked me like, okay, what is the relationship like that you're living in? Do you have something in your past that you'd like to talk about? Like, should we do something about the low self-esteem and like feeling unworthy or something like that? It would have been a different path, but nobody, as far as I remember, asked me about like what it was like at home with this my ex-husband. What was it like? Like, is there anything that we should explore there? It was just like mental problem in me, like situated here. So nothing else interesting going on in my life. Basically, that's what it feels like afterwards, looking back. And I have all the papers. I have a thick paper. What's the word? Like
folder. File.
Yeah. Like with all the papers from the time I was in hospital and from other like instances where I've been to doctor about these mental health related things, and like it could be very convincing to look at that thick pile of paper and think that there's something like expertise there explaining my situation. But when I now read those papers, it's like from a different person, from different life. Like it doesn't remind me at all. And even back then, now that I have a different way of looking at these issues, I would approach my situation back then so differently. And that's something I hear from a lot of people, like doing this podcast and having these discussions. I've heard from people who say, like, oh my goodness, I think my situation isn't so hopeless at all. Like I was led to believe that I just have this illness and I have to get used to it. But it seems that there is something else that could have helped, like could be helping.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most important things I think I've done. I've interviewed psychiatric survivors, people who have gotten out of the system some way or another. Like, there are different ways, but people have found something that is more helpful and have realized that they have to leave this behind. And that's one of the most important things I think I've done. Like having these, I call it Hope Bringer series in English, but the interviews have been in Finnish so far. But because these are stories that aren't often told because of the stigma and because people don't necessarily want to share their experiences with other people. I've experienced it myself when I talk about the issues in psychiatry with a friend of mine, for example. She isn't like knowledgeable about the issues in psychiatry. She hasn't read about the problems that we have in this current medical model. So it's very easy for people to think like it can't be that bad. Like it can't be that like this is a scientific field. Like it can't be that bad, truly. And that's one of the most important things about bringing forward the patient voices. And that's what I appreciate in your work so much, because hearing the patient voices, it's so different than what doctors say and what the some of the researchers say about the effectiveness of drugs or ECT or any of these things. And I think it can be a very isolated and lonely place to be as a patient when you realize that this isn't working, like this isn't going anywhere good. And having to meet with a psychiatrist or with a nurse or a therapist who is kind of enslaved in this medical model and can't see things differently and take their disorder lenses off and look at the people like as another human being having difficult experiences. I think that's a very lonely place, and it can be. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important, the work you've done about patient voices.
Yes, I mean, I think it's gradually getting better, Pia. And what I mean by that is that there are more spaces now where people can meet and share experiences. An awful lot of, say, Facebook groups, for instance, where thousands of people struggling with antidepressant withdrawal, for instance, tens of thousands of people on multiple Facebook groups supporting one another and not being invalidated when they try and talk about it. And movements like the Hearing Voices Network, which is a place of my main area has always been psychosis. So I mean, that's possibly the most exciting development in mental health services in the last 20 years is the growth of the Hearing Voices movement, where people, I think it's about 25 countries now, where there's groups of people who hear voices come together to help one another, where they're not stigmatized or labeled or drugged, or it's quite wonderful. And I say possibly the most exciting because you in Finland have a contender for the most exciting, which is open dialogue, of course, which is a completely different approach. Not that they never use medication, but they start from the premise that if you want to understand what's going on for somebody, you need to get everybody together who's involved in that person's life and talk about what's going on for that person, and what everybody in the room thinks might be a solution. Is such an obvious thing to do. And I was 20 years in New Zealand, and Maori people there could not understand how, when someone becomes crazy, they have different words for it, of course, but when someone becomes crazy, we take them away from their family, and behind closed doors we interview them, one person and one other person, and then we can't tell the family what was going on in that room, which is confidentiality, which I understand. But it just made no sense to them at all, because they started from the premise that if one person in our extended family's got a problem, we all have a problem. But so that is the other problem with the medical model. It's the individualizing of it and the isolating of it, and then adding the stigma on top of that. So yeah, but I think it is. I'm sorry to hear what you've been through. As you know from your conversations, it's not at all uncommon what you've been through. But I think things are slowly getting better, at least in terms of people being able to talk about it. Like your podcast is enabling people to do that. So that's changed in the last 10, 20 years. I think it's not so unusual for someone to talk about their what call it what you like, their mental health problem, but also their criticisms of how they were treated. So many people feel badly treated by our current services. I would say the majority. Well, our surveys tell us that it's the majority. We have to say some people like a biological model and like medication, so therefore for those people it works. We have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But I think that is a minority, quite honestly.
Yeah. And especially if we look at the real world outcomes, for example, the amount of people on disability payments due to mental health reasons or something like that, it doesn't look like this model is working, even if some people think it has worked for them. So on a large scale, it's important to take a look at the real world outcomes. Actually, that's something I'd like to ask you about, because the real world outcomes, I felt betrayed, basically, when I started to learn more about how these studies, for example, about antidepressants are done, that it's only about for 8-week period or something like that, and people use these for years. And similar with ECT, what I've read about your research on that, and the difficulties, like the challenges of these research or studies that have been done, that they haven't actually looked beyond the last treatment or other problems like that. How can it be? How can it be that that's the situation? Like antidepressants for about few weeks or few months, and ECT like not looking beyond the last treatment, except of course in for example the survey you recently published about the patient voices and the friends and family voices.
How can it be? It's hard to explain. It's hard to understand. I mean, it sounds like an extreme statement, but I think psychiatry is more an ideology than an evidence-based medical profession. It didn't always used to be like that. But I think somewhere about 20, 25 years ago, psychiatry sold its soul to the drug companies. The drug company's job is to sell their product, and they do that extraordinarily well. But the job of a professional or medical specialty is to have a proper boundary between itself and a profit-making organization. And they abandoned that boundary, you could argue, 20 years, 30 years ago. So they've adopted this model, which really is not evidence-based. So the drug companies control a lot of research. Some areas, 90% of the research is done, like drug trials. Most of it is done by the companies that are selling or producing and selling the product. So there's not a lot of good quality independent research. Drug companies control that. They control pretty much the internet. If you go on the internet and look for information about any sort of disorder, the majority of websites are funded by drug companies. It's not always clear that that's the case. In America, all postgraduate training from medical, for doctors after they qualify, all their postgraduate training is provided by the drug companies. And in some universities, they not only just fund individual professors, they own the School of Psychopharmacology. It's just astonishing. So I think that's a partial explanation. It's a bit simplistic, but it is a huge part of what's going on in general. You want to understand what's going on. It's an old saying, isn't it? Follow the money. And you like to think that our medical professionals are immune to that, but I'm afraid they're not. So you ask how can that be? I think that's part of the answer. But yeah, but also our regulatory bodies aren't up to the job, like the Food and Drug Administration in America or our MHRA, Medical Health Regulatory Authority. As you say, all you have to do to get a drug approved is come up with 2 studies that show, and they can last 4 weeks or 6 weeks. They show that they have some benefit within 4 to 6 weeks, and that the side effects aren't too bad. 2 studies. So what they do like 30, 40, 50 studies until they get to, which on a random basis is going to happen eventually if you submit those, and it gets approved, which is very weak. But then you've got, that's another way the drug companies control things, like in the FDA. Most of the people on the FDA, it's sort of rotating circle, really. So the people, they come from the drug company into the FDA and then go back into the. And here in Britain, I don't know what it's like in Finland, Peter, but our Medical Health Regulatory Authority is entirely funded by the drug companies. Do you probably go through the European one, or do you have, does Finland have its own one? Or?
Yeah, I think in the EU there are both like national and the European wide, the EMA. I think they can get drugs approved like both ways, depending on whether they want to do it just nationally or on the EU area on large. But it's just so like even this like what people read in scientific journals. I like to put the quotation marks because I don't think it's specifically scientific. At least I had like an idea that science is different than it is in psychiatry. And I was just, I wrote the other day I posted on X that I think psychiatry is one of the best fields to observe cognitive dissonance and strongly held beliefs in action. Yeah. Because that's how I see it nowadays. And I think one of the big reasons, what I think why we are here still in 2025 is that it would be such a painful thing to the professionals who are like using this medical model to actually realize what they are doing to their patients. Yes. On a large scale, that it would be so painful that they don't want to see it.
Yes, it would be like somebody telling me all the psychotherapy I ever did it was ineffective and was causing brain damage. Well, I'm not going to hear that, am I? I'm just not going to be able to hear that. Yeah. Hopefully it wasn't true, but but yes, you're absolutely right, because these people are human beings, and they're doing their best. They think they're helping, because the drugs and ECT very often show a sort of temporary, minimal effect, which is very often a placebo effect. But so it doesn't matter. People do sometimes feel better after taking a pill, partly because they've done something. They've taken a pill, and a doctor has listened to them just long enough to believe that there is something wrong with them, that they need some help, and now we're doing something different. So I've got, I'm going to feel better. So you feel better, and the doctor sees that sort of response and thinks it's all working. So yeah, it's very hard, as you say, hard for them to take in. A, these things aren't working, and B, they're causing a lot of damage. That it's hard to take in. So you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking the other day about some of the discussions I've had with people who have been like treated, so to speak, lately, because one of the persons especially comes to my mind. She said that like she can't understand how the psychiatrist said that now you're feeling fine, like now you're stabilized, when she herself said, like, I don't feel anything. Like, I don't feel alive, I don't feel emotions. And this expert in front of me says that now you're fine, like now your situation is stabilized. And sometimes I'm wondering, like, how can it be that the people who are the supposedly greatest experts in mental health field, they have the most authority in this medical model, the psychiatrists, and they seem to be fearing emotions so badly that they want to sedate their patients and then say, like, now you're fine, now you're feeling good.
That's a very powerful point. I think that very often the psychiatrists are medicating their own anxiety about a patient. And to be fair to them, there's a lot of anxiety involved in treating very distressed people, especially if that person is talking about suicide or is talking about hurting somebody else. The anxiety of trying to help that person and getting it right is huge. And so your job then is to sort of contain them, calm them down, and stop them from having all these emotions and thoughts. It's a process of suppressing the problem, which is understandable if you're frightened that somebody might do something really, really damaging. But I also think you're right. A lot of people, we have to be careful not to generalize too much. But a lot of psychiatrists are terrified of strong emotions and of people who see the world differently from most people. And that's understandable. But if you are terrified of strong emotions and weird experiences and getting involved with someone who's really struggling, then you really ought to go get another job. Go drive a bus or play a musical instrument or something. But just get out. If it for your own mental health, if it's because it's hard work working with people who are in distress. And in my own field of psychosis, I mean, it's very, very hard to create a relationship with somebody who's terrified of the world, etc., etc. It's not easy work. So it's understandable that some people will use a model that keeps the person at a distance, keeps the feelings at a distance, and also, to be honest, they don't have to think very much. I mean, it's intellectually lazy as well, because you've just got a simple explanation. A causes B, and the answer is C. And people's lives aren't like that. You have to, have to do some thinking about, well, how do all these things that have happened to this person fit together? You have to do a formulation, what psychological formulation of why is this person experiencing these particular things in the context of this particular sort of person or whatever. So it's not simple intellectually either, but I think that you touched on the driving force there. A lot of people are too scared of strong emotions and strange experiences to be able to be of any use to the person having those feelings, which is sad for both people involved in that situation.
Yeah. I think that's like the experiences people have with the people who are supposed to treat them. I think it's quite understandable, or at least I keep hearing from people who say that they don't want to have anything to do with doctors or anything to do with psychiatrists anymore. And one of the most frequently asked questions I get in my email inbox is, do you have a recommendation about a psychiatrist who actually listens to their patient? well, that's quite a thing to be asked like multiple times. Like the most common question I get, like, do you know any psychiatrist who actually listens and takes their patients seriously? So I
And
think
they
we
do
are,
exist. They do exist, of course. But
yeah, they
so
do
many
exist,
people, the
but
fact that
at
so many people can't find one, it speaks volumes. But
yeah,
they do exist. The other thing in their defense, we have a system set up that even if they had the skills and the capacity to sit with someone in extreme distress, they don't have the time. So
yeah,
you've got a 50-minute appointment once a month, or even if you're an inpatient unit, how often do you see the psychiatrist? Not very often. So they have these huge caseloads. And they don't really get to know any of their patients properly, if at all. They will remember which symptoms they have and what medication they're on. That's about what's realistic. So even if they have the skills, they don't have the time. The one thing, see, the major thing wrong with our mental health system is that the one thing I believe human beings need when we're in distress is a relationship with one other human being who we trust and is going to be there. And our mental health system is set up so that never happens, almost never, either because you move from one place to another, or because the staff moves around, or because the staff who are there but they only have 15 minutes a week, or whatever. So that the system is set up to almost defeat itself from the beginning. And then the other thing we do, of course, is that we round up the 100 most distressed and distressing people in the community and put them in the same building, which is madness. I mean, we used to do it to 2,000 or 3,000 people, didn't we, in the big old bin? So maybe we're moving in the right direction. But still, I've always said it. When I go crazy, do whatever you want to do. But for one thing you mustn't do is put me in a building with 99 other people that just went crazy. Please don't do that. I wouldn't like that. So I'm rambling a bit here. Focus me in on what you want me to do.
Yeah, the one thing that you reminded me about, the situation in hospitals. One of the common what's the word? Like what people have complained about recently is that even when they go to the hospital, for example, for the first time, they had expectations that there would be something like something therapeutic, something discussions or something that could help them, and instead they just are there. Like they just are there. They line up for the medication, they line up for the food. They like that's just a place to be. But there hasn't, like, that's one of the major complaints I've heard recently. Like, I was expecting to get something like to be able to talk with someone, or to be able to be heard, or to be able to go through my experiences, or like something. But
Yeah.
instead they end up being there for a while, and then they are like, okay, go back home now. And the disappointment I've heard from people when they say that I thought that going to the ward would be like helpful, like there would be something. And I've been myself. I was on a kind of I think it's a rehabilitation period, like a longer period in hospital. I was 3 months before this ward got closed, like sent from one hospital to another hospital for this longer period, because they said I need a longer period in hospital. And what happened there was, if I went to the nurse's door and knocked on it and said that, like, I have bad anxiety, could someone talk with me, please? They told me, here's this Temesta, take this, and soon it will help soon. You'll be more relieved soon. So I just took the this sedative and went back to my room and basically got to sleep. And that was the hospital that I was sent to be in a more rehabilitating environment. And when I got back, because the ward was closed, I got back to the hospital where I was sent from. The psychiatrist was very frustrated. He said that like everyone who comes back from that ward has to be first like withdrawn from the sedatives. And I was like, okay, I'm not the only one, apparently. And he was very frustrated with the situation, like, what are they doing there? What were they doing there? Because the ward got closed. But it was a weird experience also, like having this, like you have to go there to get better. And I ended up with a kind of a new drug addiction, basically.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to do here. But what can we do? What do you think? How would you like to see the mental health field change?
Well, ultimately, we need a complete paradigm shift. We need to abandon the medical model and get back to understanding that mental health problems, if we must call them, are caused by life events and circumstances. And so design a system where people do get someone to talk to about whatever they want to talk about, where people are asked about what's going on in their lives. But that's going to take a while, but there are pockets of that. We have to support and build on those pockets. So there's open dialogue, which is not just in Finland, that has spread around the world but only in pockets. But it's even got a bit of a foothold in the USA, open dialogue, which is quite impressive because the USA is the most horribly biological system and profit-oriented system. So for open dialogue to get a foothold there is excellent. Also here in England, open dialogue is quite strong. They've done some very good research, which is about to be published. In Voices Network, there's all kinds of, and there's lots of local initiatives in every country. There's people doing really good things. And let's be honest, even within the mental health system, there are amazing individuals. If you're lucky enough to bump into them, they are doing astonishing work despite the system that they're working in. So there's lots of things going on, and I think there is also more public awareness of the problems with things like antidepressants and antipsychotic medication and so forth, and ECT and diagnosis. So it's a slow process, but I think we're getting there. And on podcasts like this, and you're not alone. There's lots of people doing what you're doing around the world, trying to get the world out, hearing people's stories. But it's a slow process to change. It's the drug companies aren't going away, and they're very, very powerful and very effective. They don't spend any money without it being useful. Their research is much better than ours in terms of what works, and what works for them, of course, is how they can sell more and more drugs. I mean, it's bizarre at the moment. I don't know what your Finnish numbers are. Probably about the same. But we are now prescribing antidepressants to 1 in 5 adults. 1 in 5. And even higher if you're a woman, or if you're over 60, or if you live in a poor area. So if you're an older woman living around where I live, here in Newham in London, which is one of the poorest boroughs in the country, you've got about a 50% chance of being on a psychiatric medication. That scares me. I mean, yes, we have to say again that these drugs help some people, usually temporarily. Long term is not a good idea, but in the short term, some drugs can be helpful to get you through a rough time. But one in 5 on antidepressants. I mean, that's just bizarre. And there's still some psychiatrists saying, "Oh, there's a lot of untreated depression out there still." So I wonder what is the right number. So. But I think, as I say, there's growing awareness of these things. We've done a lot of work here in Britain on antidepressant and antidepressant withdrawal. And I don't think any GPs in the country can now claim they don't know about that from the work that a number of us have been doing. So there is progress been made. And as I said, you've got open dialogue in Finland is an absolute example of it's only one way to do it. There's many ways. Because the alternative model, which is, I mean, what do we can call it, trauma informed, or a psychosocial model, or just I would call it a common sense model. is coming, but it's going to take a while for the mainstream services to catch up with all these different bits and pieces that are making the changes. So lots of people just got fed up of waiting for psychiatry to evolve into something useful, and they've just gone on and started doing alternatives. which is encouraging. So yeah, slow process, but we're getting there.
Yeah, that's it's good, and I think the internet and social media have also done like very good for the people in this thing, because we can find like
Yes.
peers, we can find other people
Yes.
who have had similar experiences.
Yes.
But what would you say? Like, what advice would you give to people who are currently struggling, or who have loved ones or friends who are struggling, and like they wonder how could how could they be helped, and like any advice, like what to take into consideration when seeking help or looking for help?
Well, that's obviously a difficult question to answer in a general way because everybody's different. But I think if there is a general point you can make, is to educate yourself, to find out about whatever the person is recommending, whether it's a drug or ECT or even a diagnosis. Go do a lot of reading about that and find out as much as you can, so that you can make some informed choices about whether you want to go along with what's suggested. So, for instance, let's take the most common treatment at the moment is antidepressants. So if someone suggests you go on antidepressants, you need to do some reading about how effective it is, and if you find the good information, accurate information, you'll find that it's barely better than placebo, which doesn't mean it's a bad thing, because placebo is quite a good thing. Placebo means, as I said before, you've done something, you've gone to talk to somebody, you're doing something about it, so you feel a bit better because of the hopes and expectations. That's not a bad thing, but it's usually not because of anything in the pill. But you also need to know about the adverse effects, and you've talked to Pia about one of the major adverse effects of antidepressants is, for some people they can lower the feeling of sadness and depression, but they remove all feelings. So this has got this dreadful emotional blunting where you don't feel sad, but you don't feel anything, and that's just not a life. But for a few weeks or months, that might be useful for some people. If you're really freaking out all over the place, it might be temporarily, just to feel nothing might be a relief. But it's not a life. It's not a cure.
Yeah.
But then you also need to read about the withdrawal symptoms for antidepressants, because we now know that 50% of people will, when they try and come off antidepressants, will experience withdrawal effects, and 50% of them, the effects will be severe, and it can last a long time. So I guess the key message is just to inform yourself. This is a hard thing to say, but don't be overly trusting of your doctor. So I mean, we all want to trust our doctor, but be aware that they've been bombarded with a lot of information from drug companies which isn't accurate. And so we kind of, sad to say, we have to read up ourselves. And I think that should be true of any drug that's recommended, not just psychiatric drugs. You need to see what the side effects are and what the efficacy is. So yeah, information is the key. But also, I would counsel against swallowing a simplistic explanation for your difficulties. It's tempting, and as we've discussed earlier, it's temporarily reassuring to have a word that seems to explain everything. But the human beings aren't that simple. We're complex creatures, and lots of influences on us, and lots of capacities to tell ourselves stupid things about ourselves because of bad things happened, and we're there's lots of different ways we can mess ourselves up, and the world can mess us up. And conversely, lots of ways that with other people's help we can come out of that. So I'm rambling a bit again, but don't be suckered in by the illusion that these diagnoses, like anxiety disorder or whatever, explains why you're anxious. You're anxious because scary things have gone on in your life, or you're scared of something. Now that's what anxiety is. Not you haven't got a thing inside of you causing you to be anxious. So information, and be a bit skeptical about simplistic diagnostic explanations, and it's a real cliche, but if you believe like I do that most of our emotional difficulties are caused by bad things that have happened to us, often from other human beings, intentionally or not, if you believe that, then probably the answer is going to be found in good things happening between you and another human being. So you've got to find that one or two people who will really listen to you and really care about you. And hopefully you'll care about them as well. So the solutions are in relationships, I think, not in pills. So it sounds a bit cliche, I'm sorry, but that's after the 50 odd years I've been in the field, that's the rather, in a way, simple conclusion that I've come to. So perhaps I'm just as simple as the medical model in a different way. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's the common sense approach you mentioned before. Like it makes sense, and I'd like to recommend again people to read this as a starting point for finding like what kind of questions we should be asking. And as you mentioned in the book, it gives perhaps more questions than answers, but that's a good thing, I think. And as my last question, I'd like to ask. Is there somewhere you'd like to point people to, direct people to read more about your work, or the websites, anything you'd like to mention?
Well, no, not so much about my work, but just be aware there's lots of organisations out there that can help. So, which I expect you share from time to time. Like, so if you're going through difficulty with psychiatric drugs, you need to be aware of organisations like Inner Compass, which is a huge sort of internet-based support system for people going through that. I'm chair of the International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal, so we try and provide some resources on our website, and we have our next event coming up on October 19th about antipsychotic drugs, which you can find on our website, International Institute for Psychiatric Drug Withdrawal. So there's lots of organisations out there. If you are struggling with psychosis or know somebody who is, I strongly recommend looking at the Hearing Voices Network and seeing if there's anything going on in your country or your region. So yeah, just look out for the pockets that there are out there, and there's lots of them, and the mental health system doesn't always tell you about them.
Yeah,
So,
I will make sure to link to those like organizations and websites underneath this episode. And now we are heading towards the hour that we have today, and I feel like I could spend many more hours talking with you, but I highly appreciate this discussion. Thank you for the work you do, and keep on doing the good work.
And thank you for talking about the issues and getting these ideas around, and encouraging people to think a bit more about it all and support one another. It's a really important function you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And for our listeners and people who are watching this video, thank you, and see you later.
Bye, everyone.